Can start now. Everyone is ready, right? Perfect. So good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues, wherever you are. We would like to welcome you to our APSCE webinar related to educational gamification and game-based learning special interest group. So with us today, we have our assistant professor, Lucas Leo, and he will be talking about his presentation and speech, which is building in context, understanding of learning behaviors for designing game-based assessments. Before I give him the floor, I would like to introduce my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Leo. He is first an assistant professor of learning design and implementation science at the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong. He has been working to explore how to design game-based learning experiences by engaging learners in active problem solving. Also, one of his current work aims at promoting the development and learning transfer of computational thinking among K-12 students and teachers through educational games and robotics. And of course, he focuses on too many other areas such as sequential analysis, social network analysis, among others. So without any further delay, I would like to give the floor to my dear colleague. So Lucas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ahmed. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and present at the Asian Pacific Science Society for Computers in Education. I know probably most of you guys are very interested in the ideal of game-based learning and game-based assessment. And this is a field that has attracted a lot of attention, I think, in the past few years, 5-10 years. And there has been a lot of discussion around it and also a lot of research effort in this particular field. So one of the main purposes of today for my talk is to share a little bit about my own experiences and some of my reflections when I'm doing research in under this particular topic. Is particularly trying to build an in-context understanding about learning behaviors through designing game-based learning as well as the game-based assessment. So I think with no further ado, I will get started with my presentation. I'll probably talk for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, so that will give us a little bit more time to have a discussion at the end. But on the other hand, if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, feel free to just leave in the comment section. I'll keep an eye on it. So let me get us started. And so as I have talked about it just a minute ago, the idea for today's talk is to share basically two cases and two studies that I have done with my colleagues in trying to build an in-context understanding about the learning behaviors within games. And I think I probably do not need to give too much of an introduction to what game-based learning and game-based assessment is to this group, because I guess most of you guys are kind of familiar with this idea. In short, game-based learning is believed that it can provide a really engaging and also beneficial learning experience for students. And on the other hand, digital game-based learning can also be a rich context for assessment, because students are actively engaged in the learning process. And in this process, students generate a lot of different data that could help us to infer what students are thinking, what students need, and how students are performing, etc. And that would give us a very good idea about how to assess students, their learning, their competencies, their affective states, and so forth within authentic environments. And that idea was basically captured by Dr. Valerie Schutt. She coined the term of stealth assessment, which talks about combining the learning process and also the assessment piece together. So typically in most of our traditional educational settings, learning and assessment are separated. So we ask the students to learn first and then say, hey, once we're done with learning, let's assess you. And this assessment is usually done post hoc to learning and often separated from the learning itself. However, the ideal of stealth assessment is trying to make the inference in real time when students are learning, so that the assessment component is quietly inferring learners' competencies, attitudes, learning in general from different ways at the same time when the learning is happening. In a traditional classroom, it is virtually impossible because there's no way that teachers can actually jot down all the notes and make formal assessments. However, in terms of regular teacher classroom practices, every teacher does this all the time, because when teachers are within the classroom, he or she are engaged in the process of observing students. They interact with students, then they will get an inference about how students are performing. And then oftentimes we will hear from teachers that, hey, the students should have performed better on their test, or this is just lucky for some certain students. And when teachers are making these statements or inferences after students taking the test or after seeing the result of the test, it's actually based on the fact that the teachers already quietly or stealthily assess the students' performance during their learning process. So, but on the other hand, game-based learning provide a great platform for us to understand what is going on in students' learning, particularly their game-based learning. And as shown on the graph on the right, you can see that the game play provide a lot of data which can be captured in many different forms, for example, log file. And then we can use some sort of rubric or some sort of assessment model to understand how students are doing. And then this can help us to update the student model, which reflects students' performance, which will ultimately feed back to students' gameplay and help them to move forward. So that's the basic idea of game-based assessment, and particularly stealth assessment. There are a lot of promises about game-based assessment. There's been a lot of past research showing that game-based assessment can provide a very reliable estimation on students' learning. And also because we have this automated system so that it can be scalable to many different contexts and to a larger population. And also, I think the best part of it is it provides authentic context for students in both their learning as well as assessment, so that students do not need to be nervous about, oh, I'm taking a test, so that they cannot perform the real themselves. On top of that, we actually also hope to use game-based learning to provide a more equitable learning experiences and also assessment experiences for students at all levels. Many students, I think me, myself included, growing up is never a very good test taker. I always get very nervous when I am being assessed. However, this type of opportunities actually help us to understand the learner's performance with a much diverse backgrounds and also their needs. So that's just a little bit more introduction about the game-based learning as well as the game-based assessments. However, with all these promises, there are some challenges. And actually, there are a lot of challenges in this big idea, and I'm just listing some of them here. Well, first of all, it is definitely not an easy task at all. The whole game-based learning process is actually very complex because it involves a lot of different interactions. It's dynamic, and it's oftentimes individualized. Everybody is a little bit different, and also the learning context may vary from game to game. And oftentimes when we say, hey, we want to measure something, there are a lot of confounding variables. Every time when we want to assess a target construct, there are a lot of different constructs also interconnected with each other. So at the end of the day, it is typically very hard to distinguish construct from construct within the context of game-based learning, because students will never directly tell you whether they are, for example, thinking about one piece of knowledge, let's say Newton's first law versus Newton's second law. And also, this is another persistent challenge, is learning within games is highly contextualized. So it is not, there's no promise that the learning with games will transfer to a different context, particularly when we give students a more formalized paper pencil test to ask students to perform. So that part is also very hard. So in addressing all these challenges, one of the main goal of my today's talk and also my recent work on game-based assessment is trying to build a more in-context understanding about learning behaviors when we are designing the game-based learning assessment, game-based assessment, so that we will hopefully understand the learning process better, instead of saying that with one particular game or one particular design of assessment, we can assess everything. So I think that's probably interim step before we can build a better game-based assessment. So primarily, I want to answer two big questions here. Number one is, how do different contexts may impact our understanding about learning behaviors in games, as well as how to design a game-based assessment that is based on our in-context understanding about learning. Now, and that part, I feel is probably very important before we get started. Excuse me. And so the first study I would discuss is a very interesting study that we have done to try to understand students' pausing behavior in game-based learning context. So pausing is actually very, very common. We pause all the time. For example, just a minute ago, I took a break and drank drank a little bit of water. And it is very common in pretty much almost all multi-step cognitive tasks. Unless it is a task that only requires one step to solve, then there would be no pause. Otherwise, people take natural pauses in their problem solving. And particularly in game-based learning environment, not everybody is constantly playing, or doing. There's always some blank times. And what is more interesting is pause is not an observable behavior. It is something hidden within the log, because typically when we use game-based learning systems to log students' performance, we log their observed behaviors. Like they did this, they did that, they did a lot of different things. But typically, the system would not log when students are pausing. But on the other hand, it is actually a very important behavior in problem solving if you look into the literature in problem solving as well as pausing. What is more challenging, what makes this task even more challenging, is pause actually has a lot of different meanings. On the surface, it's people not doing anything, but in reality, it reflects a lot of different things. For example, students might be planning something, say, I need to plan to solve this, so they may choose not to do anything. Maybe they're just waiting for the result to come. They're predicting something to happen. Maybe it's after the fact that they are trying to think about, I don't know what is going on, or let me reflect on what I have already done. If there are any changes I can make, they may not choose to do anything. Instead, they will just take a break. Or it could be literally just a break. Like they need a little bit of water, or they need to go to the bathroom and so forth. Or in a more collaborative setting, they may be talking to other people. They're away from their keyboard, they're away from their screen, they are engaged in something else instead of the game being presented in front of them. So with that in mind, we asked two questions in this study. First is, what are some different pause behavior patterns that emerge in the game-based learning? process, and also how does these behaviors might relate to the learning that we are mostly interested in through game-based assessment. Under this task, we would like to model all these possible pause behaviors within the game-based problem solving. What we have done is to identify students' pauses by operationalizing the pause as the distance between one, the time difference between one behavior and another. So basically, we subtract one behavior from another from the timestamp perspective, so that we get each pauses. So these pauses are from very, very small to very, very long. And what you're seeing on the screen is actually on a natural log, so that we can actually map all of them with a reasonable presentation. Otherwise, it's going to be a super long tail. From the on the screen, I only showed 16 students pause distributions, and it is pretty much obvious that almost everybody demonstrated a multi-model distribution in their pause behavior. And when I'm saying almost everybody, it's everybody. So we checked everybody's pause distribution, and there's no single person that tells us, it's probably just a normal distribution. We can all see multi-model from these distributions. So that gives us the idea that this continuous distribution of pausing times may not be just one normal distribution that we typically think about a construct. It may be a result of mixture distributions. So possibly there are different states behind this mixture distribution, and that motivates us to identify these possible latent classes. And we used a flex mixture model to fit all the possible distributions to identify different classes for each individual students. And then we identify 3 possible types of pauses. The first type is that we call the active pauses or active states, which typically have very short pauses. Like you are engaged in doing something, well, there are naturally some breaks you are going to take, but they're very, very short. It's just natural transition from one behavior to another. And we identify another state, which is inactive states, which typically have much longer pauses. These are typically when students are engaged in, for example, planning or reflecting, so that they are just sitting there and thinking about something, not necessarily engaged in doing something very actively. And that's why we call them inactive states. And a third state I have identified is this AFK behavior, which is much, much longer. When students are away from keyboard, they are obviously not engaged in anything, are typically disengaged. And so that this type of latent class has the longest pauses. So we have mapped everybody's the center of their latent classes, and then we show it here in the table that, for example, in the active states, it typically it's 0.04 second as the medium. It's very short, transitioning from one behavior to another. And inactive states is roughly a minute, sometimes it could be less than a minute, sometimes it can be almost like 2 minutes without doing anything. On the other hand, AFK could be much, much longer. And you can see that it goes all the way to 5 minutes or even longer. I think that's 60 minutes there. So it's completely disengaged in this process. To dive a little bit deeper into what these distribution actually mean, we actually have conducted a correlational analysis on all these pauses, as well as the students' prior learning and also gameplay. and we have identified a very interesting pattern here, is when students have a higher prior knowledge, actually they tend to engaged in more in inactive states compared to active states. So this is also a very it makes a lot of sense, because when you know a lot of different things, you may not try to test and try and error just to get the answer. Instead, you probably will spend a little bit of time to understand what is going on before moving on to the next step, because you can actually foresee what is going on in the next few steps, so that you may not appear to actively doing a lot of different things, but instead every single step is being executed deliberately. And that is very important in game-based learning. And we can also see that prior knowledge is negatively related to AFK states. Obviously, if you have very low prior knowledge, you have no idea what is going on, it is very likely that you're going to disengage from this learning process. On the other hand, we also see that the level completion is possibly related to active states, and obviously, if you engage in more active problem solving, you will solve more problems. And if you do not try to do things in a very fast pace, you may not solve a lot of problems. And also the AFK states is negatively related to level completion, which is also quite understandable. So notably here, we have identified that the AFK, the away from keyboard behavior, is negatively related to learning gain. So if you are disengaged, then it is very likely that you're not going to learn anything. So all these actually help us to understand what students are doing and what students probably need. For example, for students who are engaged in active problem solving and within a lot of active states, it probably indicate that they have lower prior knowledge, and they're really busy with just completing the level instead of learning behind it. On the other hand, for students who are engaged in more inactive problem solving or inactive states in their problem solving, probably have a sufficient level of prior knowledge, but they probably need a little bit more help in terms of game mechanics. And also for students who are away from keyboard, if we can detect it through this model, we can easily flag the system or warn the teachers that, hey, we may have a couple of students who are disengaged from this process. Then certain interventions could happen after these inferences. So that's the first case I would like to discuss. So we start from a very simple behavior, pause, with a lot of different meanings, but when we break it down into different contexts, actually can mean a lot of different things and have a lot of different implications in our game-based learning design as well. So the second case I would like to discuss here is about another study that we have done. Actually, we had done a number of different studies on this particular case, on measuring persistence through gameplay. So previously, we tried to tackle a more behavioral construct, which is pause. But here, we try to tackle a more hard to measure construct, which is an affective state persistence through students' gameplay. So typically, game persistence is being defined as a continued voluntary pursuit of the goal in spite of the appropriate difficulty. So you would like to keep going no matter how hard it is. And typically, we would like students to demonstrate their tenacity and show an unceasing effort to completing the task, even if it is extremely hard. And in many cultures, we speak very highly of this particular quality. And this behavior has to be voluntary. It cannot be told to say, you have to do this. but instead it's a voluntary behavior. As I want to do this, I want to persist through. Participant needs to identify the goal, as well as the challenge has to be somewhere appropriate, instead of way too hard, so that the participant may just lose the hope eventually. So typically in the past, research in persistence in actually both games and also problem-solving literature is being defined as the duration spent on task. So it's very straightforward. Obviously, if you give students a couple of different tasks, which is extremely hard, and then observe how long they will stay on the task, it gives us a pretty good idea about how persistent they are on these difficult tasks. However, we would like to point out a caveat, or I would like to point out a caveat here in this idea is duration alone is actually difficult to differentiate the active engagement versus idle behaviors. Basically, students are not doing anything, because obviously I can just stay on the task without doing anything. I can say, hey, this is very hard, but in order to cheat the system, in order to cheat the system to think I am a persistent person, I choose to do nothing. And I just stay on the task. I still get a lot of time spent on the task, but actually I haven't really achieved anything. So this is typically called wheel spinning. Another form of wheel spinning is I keep trying and trying and trying and trying, but I'm not getting anywhere. That is not necessarily the good persistence that we would like to see. Instead, it is either completely disengagement, or we might call it a little bit stubborn. So this is the little caveat in the previous literature on how to measure persistence. So we would really like to differentiate the positive persistence versus the wheel spinning. One of the ideas that we came up with, this is actually not a very new idea. It's an idea that has been widely used in a lot of game research, particularly outside of the educational research. So this idea is called ELO rating system. This is a system that was developed originally from chess playing. So, for example, we have two players play against each other. Whoever wins will accumulate more ELO difficulty, ELO rating. And then when we have a player who has a higher ELO rating against another player, then we may be able to calculate the probability that one player A will win against player B in the next match. So this is a very interesting idea, very simple to implement algorithm. If you guys are interested in this, feel free to search it online. There's a lot of introduction to it, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what is going on with this particular algorithm. So what we have done in this particular study is we try to we define the players in a regular chess game as the real player against the levels. So it's almost like the game is playing chess against the players. If the student complete the level, then we say that the participant wins the level. But on the other hand, if the student fails to solve a particular problem, then we say the level actually beats player. So better players will beat more levels. On the other hand, more difficult levels will beat more players. And then the ELO scores will increase when someone beats another as the time goes by. So one of the ways that we try to understand how this appropriate difficulty is to use this ELO rating system to filter out the the very hard levels as well as the very easy levels. Like for example, when we say a player 1 has a ELO rating at 1500, then we basically do not necessarily need to consider all the levels that's below this player's ELO rating, because it's not that very hard for this player anymore. We can only focus on the appropriate difficulty levels based on this particular player's ability. And this could be implemented in continually in real time, so that we can get a continuous estimation on players' difficulty level as well as the level's difficulty level, so that we can understand how appropriate this difficulty level is. And we move on to try to understand how well our this ELO algorithm help us to understand the difficulty the students are encountering. So one of the ways that we try to understand is to compare the ELO rating system with our expert rating system on different tasks. And the relationship was very promising. Actually, the ELO rating gives us a more continuous spectrum to understand how difficult each level and each context is, so that we can better understand whether students need to persist in this context or not. Moving on, we actually also see a lot of very promising results on how ELO rating is related to, for example, the number of times a level was left unsolved, and also compared to the expert ratings. When we ask the expert to say, how difficult this level is, and try to compare this with ELO, actually we will see that ELO can better predict whether the level will be left unsolved compared to the expert ratings. And similarly, when we use the typical a measure for persistence as the mean duration to solve a level, we'll also see that the ELO score are better correlated with this mean duration to solve a level compared to expert rating. So as a result, we argue that ELO difficulty will help us to zoom into the context that help us to really understand how challenged the students are actually feeling and how appropriate these challenges are, so that we can better understand whether they need to persist through this process or not. Moving on, I would like to discuss a little bit more about how to design game-based assessments with all these contexts being taken into consideration. So typically, in a regular design development of assessment, it is being done from a top-down approach. Say you want to have something you would like to assess, and then you break it down and say, okay, there are a number of different sub-constructs I would like to assess within this target construct. And then we design items. For each sub-construct, we design a number of different items, and then we aggregate all of them together. Occasionally, you will have one item tap on multiple construct, but typically, we do this from top down, and then we'll accumulate a number of different items. And then very typically, we just aggregate them all of them together in whatever way you would like to, and then say, yay, we have measured the target construct. So notice that this top-down approach is reasoning from the left side to the right side. But then when we are actually trying to assess something, we are moving from the right side all the way to the left, which may not necessarily be the case all the time. So for example, we probably also see this all the time in, I guess, a more traditional educational system, that someone could perform very well on the test, or very well on different assessment tasks, but actually they do not really know what to do in terms of the target construct. The first example came into my mind is actually driving test. So we have broken down in the driving ability into many smaller components, and we give people tests on their understanding about the rules of traffic, and we also have smaller tasks to assess them, their ability to drive, and also we ask them to drive on the road for a very short period of time. And very, very often, people do not actually know how to drive with a reasonable level of proficiency after passing the driving test. And this problem is more prevalent in many other school subjects we are trying to assess. So instead, I would like to propose a dual directional process in designing the game-based assessment, particularly put context into consideration. So from the left side to the right side is the very typical way that we design our assessment. We break down our target construct, and then we try to understand within what context we can observe these constructs, and also within this context, what we can observe as the different items. So this is a conceptual and abstract design. But on the other hand, we also need to take this design into empirical world and also try to understand what exactly is going on in different contexts so that we move from the right side all the way to the left side. So we try to understand how different observables, for example, like pause, for example, taking challenges, the duration into context. For example, whether students are planning, whether students are reflecting, whether students are accepting a task that's higher than their ability or it's lower than their ability, and then move on to the sub-construct that we would like to assess how they are doing within these contexts, so that we can make the final inference about their target construct. So in this process, the assessment is basically inferential process. So we're trying to infer how students are doing on their target construct based on all the information that we have collected through observing different things within different contexts, and which reflects their ability, their learning, their affective states, and so forth. So I think this is one of the reflections that I have taken after designing all different game-based assessment environment to really understand students' learning. So to actually wrap up, it's actually not necessarily a wrap up. It's another side note I would like to make before I end this talk. Is oftentimes we think, hey, data is fantastic. We see all these amazing things in the data, and we all celebrate the potential of data. But the question I would like to ask here is data the panacea? Obviously, we can get a lot of things from the data, but one point I would like to make here is data may not equal to answer, at least right away. Many times we're just trying to find a small golden coin in the long river. And two counter examples to support my claim is a very famous survival bias. When people have done analysis on the airplanes that came back from the World War II. So if you only look at the data that we collect, sometimes you will be fooled. And also in behavioral science, if we try to observe expert and novice chess players so that we can create a better instructional strategies to train chess players, to say, okay, what is the most obvious differences between the expert and the novice? Is the expert plays chess much faster. Then if you come to the conclusion that moving fast equals to playing chess better, then you're making a huge mistake, because this is only something that we can see, or the easy data we can collect, but we completely miss the contextual meaning about what data would like to tell us and what exactly is beneficial to our inferences process. As a conclusion, there are many different future challenges for game-based assessment. One of the challenges is the cost, because obviously to develop such system and try to build a really in-depth, in-context understanding about learning is not a simple task. It actually costs a lot. So one of the things that we have been testing is how to automate this process, particularly take the best usage of data mining techniques, as well as some of them causal inferences techniques that is already available to help us to make these in-depth and also in-context reasoning in real time. And also transferability is another challenge, is that once we build a in-context understanding, how do we assess its of transferability across different contexts? How likely these understanding can be transferable? This is actually an open question. And what is more important is how to engage human beings, students, teachers, parents, many different stakeholders within this system, within the loop of game-based assessment. I think this in-context understanding is not to say that once we build up this in-context understanding about what is going on, then everything is going to be fine. Instead, we would really like to engage our different stakeholders within this process, so they can tell us what they think about game-based assessment, as well as how to make the best use of game-based assessment. And the last point is really take a design-based research approach to design these assessments, so that we can build a better understanding about how learning happens within games and how we can support better learning experiences through designing these game-based learning as well as the game-based assessment environments. So with that being said, I think this is a very exciting field with a lot of different opportunities, and also we have a lot of important and challenging future directions that we need to go and try to tackle. But with that being said, that's pretty much of everything I would like to share today. I think I'm right on time. I have a little bit more time to answer a few questions or have some discussions. So please tell me what you think, and if you have any questions after hearing me talking for 40 minutes. I think I see a hand in the chat, Maria. I don't know, Maria, can Maria talk, or how can I invite you to talk? All right, looks like there's probably no way to invite you to talk very easily. So if you have any questions, please type in the question and answer section so that I will share this with everybody. Sorry, Maria. No problem, I'm monitoring the Q&A section. How do we establish ground truth? This is a very, very good question. the first response I would say is, what exactly is ground truth? There's a lot of different ways to really define what ground truth is within a complex setting. It is not as simple as most of the computer science other fields would like to tackle. For example, identify what is a cat, what is a dog. It's very easy to establish the ground truth. In many cases, like for example, in students problem solving, whether they are planning or whether they're reflecting, is a little bit hard to see, and sometimes the learners cannot really articulate for themselves directly. So one of the two of the approaches that we have been taken is, number one is through grounded observations. So we need a lot of qualitative inquiries to understand what exactly is going on in these cases, and really build a in-depth understanding about the context before we can even move forward claiming that what exactly is going on with all these quantitative data mining techniques. And I didn't actually show that some of the qualitative work that we have done within these systems and in these environments. And also another very good tool to be used in particular behavioral science field is through Think Out Loud protocol. Is we ask the people to articulate what exactly is going on in these processes, so that we will better understand. So at least we have hopefully a slightly better estimation about what the ground truth is. Another possible, not necessarily solution, but another possible way to address this is actually not trying to pursue the ground truth, instead try to use different sources of data to triangulate, so that we may implement multimodal data analysis, including students' behavior, including students' affective information. There are possibly sometimes I also see studies done in neuroscience, their neural information, so that we can understand what is going on, and also their utterances, the discourse going on, particularly in a collaborative setting, will also help us to better understand, and also triangulate what is going on in these fields. So it is not typically I would say, machine learning way to understand or to predict what is going on from the perspective of what is the ground truth, and we're trying to approach the ground truth, but instead, I think through these efforts, we're actually trying to build an in-context understanding about what is happening in the learning process. So yeah, these are some of my thoughts at this moment. I don't know if that answers your question, Maria. No problem. I also see Liana has a hand raised. Just so you know, Liana, I don't think we can help you to turn on the webcam and speak. So please type in the chat. Okay. So good morning. When the assessment to be made using games, some students may think this is not a serious assignment. How to persuade students not to take the task in serious ways? Thank you. This is also a very interesting question, and actually I'll have a small conversation with a couple of my students last week on this idea as well. Not really the assessment, but for game-based learning, because people have been questioning, like, why game-based learning? I mean, nobody really take the game seriously. How do you expect someone to really learn these? But I think one of the ways is to engage our students with a prolonged experiences instead of a one-time thing. So the ideal of game-based assessment is definitely not a one-time thing. Say, hey, today we're playing this game, and then it's the end of the story, and will never come back at these again. Instead, we would really like to design these experiences so that we can engage students with an extended period of time. So for example, the games that we have developed that actually I've shared in today's talk, it's called Physics Playground. So we have developed more than 200 levels with this game and tapped on 9 different competencies in physics, and actually that covers a semester long, and actually more than a semester's long content in middle school science class, and also a little bit of high school science class. So with that being implemented, it's not an assignment that we're trying to give to students, but instead it's a prolonged experience that we would like to engage students. So in this process, hopefully, we will get a little bit more data from students, so to understand what is going on. I think there was another point I would like to make, but I forgot about it. But yeah, I see Liana here. Do you want to just talk? So I guess another point I would like to make here is this is another idea behind the self-assessment, is we actually do not want to make the learning process to be separated from assessment process. We would like the assessment as well as the learning to be combined in a seamless way. Oh, fantastic. So once the learning and assessment are combined in a seamless way, we do not need to worry about, say, hey, this is the learning, that is the assessment, and then we need to communicate with our students and say, hey, this is what is going on, and then try to assess them. But instead, we engage students in learning, and in this process, we'll assess them. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Liz. You can hear my voice?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, thank you so much for your answering my questions. Yeah, actually, I'm a lecturer in one university in Indonesia. So it's quite concern for me, like if I want to use the game-based learning. So it's very interesting nowadays to study about this one. But the thing is, like what I'm asking you, that the students will thinking that I'm also playing with games with them. So they will not take it serious. They will not do it like proper way. So yeah, something like that. They will make it like this is entertainment for them. And then as a lecturer, we have our learning outcome. We have also our learning assessment. It's not able to get that one. We are not able to obtain that one. Even though you say like the students need to explore, we are as a lecturer, we become observer. But the thing is, with the game study, it seems like very difficult. But how do you think about that? Thank you.
I would actually agree with you. There are actually a lot of crappy games out there that is not very easy to use or just compatible with the current classrooms. So there actually has to be a lot of studies being done and a lot more efforts to be done in how to bring these experiences within into classrooms. But one of the things I would like to point out here is what at least the direction I am heading to is definitely not some prepackaged thing that, okay, today we're doing this, so that students are playing the game, and then after they're playing the game, everything is fine. Instead, I'm thinking about how to engage our students in active problem solving with different environments, maybe including games, maybe including simulations, maybe including XR environments and so forth, so that in this way, we communicate with our students very clearly that they're going to solve different problems. They need to tackle different goals. and the learning will happen through this process. Like for example, in the physics game I've just demonstrated, I didn't have too much time to talk about it. We do not tell students who are going to learn Newton's first law and Newton's second law here today immediately, but instead we give them different challenges that involves these knowledge. If students are not familiar with these principles, physical principles, there's no way that they will be able to solve these problems. But on the other hand, they may be able to get some intuitions about how to solve different problems, which will contribute to their cognitive footings before we can even introduce the formal knowledge to them. So in this way, we help students to construct knowledge through interacting with our systems, or interacting with all kinds of different problem-solving systems, so that hopefully they will take something with you and something that belongs to them instead of being passed down through the teachers. So that's also another way that I see about game-based assessment, is not necessarily a thing that we need to communicate with our students, say, hey, today we are assessing you with the game, but instead, as I said, there needs to be a ecosystem that needs to be built around how to engage our students. Oh, absolutely. I think actually you can. I'll just leave my email address in the comment section. If you guys are interested in contacting me, please feel free to just search my name on the internet. You should be able to find me. I still see the hands of Maria, if you would like to.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I forgot to lower my hand.
Oh, no, it's okay. We probably need to wrap up, but here's another question. Good morning. I'm interested in game-based assessment. If I'm not able to develop a game, if there is any platform for research, focusing on research and collaboration, competency assessment. I am not sure. When you're saying platform, I'm not exactly sure what do you mean. Are you talking about a game platform where these things can happen, or a research platform where different people can collaborate? I would say for the cases that you cannot develop a game, actually you can just take a game, even a prepackaged game, and then do some more qualitative work around it and see how people interact. You do not necessarily need a lot of real-time data unless you would like to take the data mining way that I have talked about. There are a lot of other ways to track data, and actually, even if you just capture the visual data, you can still analyze a lot of data traces come out of the recordings or utterances generated from students. I think particularly that's reasonable for collaboration settings. In terms of a research platform, I'm sure there are also a lot of other teams working on this, so that you might want to reach out to. Aroma talked about, there's a question on game-based assessment in practice, whether we have to design, develop all the functions that I've mentioned from the beginning. Absolutely not. So Aroma's question is whether we need to design everything ready to go at the beginning. It's a big project, and can we design game-based learning and then perfect it later? It's a scalable method. Obviously, you do not need to design everything from the very beginning, because it is impossible to foresee everything. And all these analysis that I have talked about are the analyses that we have done throughout all these years as we are still developing the game. So one of the my responses would be the design-based research approach is a very viable and possibly also scalable way to approach this. Is we're not necessarily trying to develop something and then just assess, but instead it's a process. So I think it's 10:30. I know some of you guys are probably in a different time zone, so it's probably pretty late. So thank you, everyone. Please scan and fill out the feedback form when you're exiting out. And I think that's pretty much it. Is there anything you would like to add, Lancian? All right. So if nothing else, thank you everybody for being here. Again, it's my pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me. I hope to see you guys in the future at different locations. Thank you very much.